I announced my pregnancy to my husband's family and they gave me the dirtiest looks. I was confused and asked my husband about it. He was acting clueless until I got a call from my sister-in-law begging me not to baby trap her brother. I confronted my husband about this, and now they are all panicking. I'm female, 28, and my husband Ron, male, 34, is going through a huge issue, and I would like to know whether what I'm about to do is the right thing. For context, I met my husband 4 years ago, and I still remember the day I met him like it was yesterday. I would always go to the same coffee shop, and I guess he must have noticed me because one morning he came up to me and asked me for my number. Ron is a really good-looking person, and he looked like he worked in finance, so I didn't hesitate much before giving him my number. He called me, we talked, and decided to go out for a date. Ron was very upfront with me about his family's wealth right from the beginning. He told me that his dad worked really hard to become one of the top real estate agents so he could give their family a very luxurious life. He asked me about my family, and I told him how I come from a lower-income family but that I had worked hard to become an accountant. I had a good income and was self-sufficient, which was a dream come true for someone with my background. At first, everything seemed perfect between Ron and me. He would take me out to fancy dinners, shower me with expensive gifts, and talk endlessly about his family's wealth. He lived in a sprawling mansion, drove luxury cars, and wore designer clothes without a second thought. Coming from humble beginnings myself, I have to admit that I was mesmerized by his lifestyle and also felt a bit self-conscious. I would tell him that he was free to find someone more from his status, but despite our different backgrounds, Ron and I connected on a deeper level. I had a stable job that I was proud of, and he admired my determination and work ethic. When I met Ron's family for the first time, I couldn't help but notice the air of arrogance that surrounded them. Their mansion was like something out of a magazine, filled with expensive art and lavish decor. However, what struck me the most was how cold and distant they seemed towards me from our very first meeting. His mother refused to shake my hand and ignored me blatantly. It was as if she had immediately assumed I was only interested in Ron for his money, and she made this very clear through her demeanor and probing questions about my background. His parents wanted to know everything about my upbringing, education, and career, almost as if they were trying to gauge whether I was worthy of being with Ron. His oldest sister kept asking if I really just happened to meet Ron in that coffee shop or if it was just an elaborate plan I had to run into him. No matter how many times Ron and I clarified that it was, in fact, he who had asked me out and that I had no idea about who he was, she didn't believe us, telling me how everyone knows who they are. To be honest, I genuinely had not heard about them or seen them since I didn't grow up in such a wealthy neighborhood. Regardless of their insults and little jabs, I kept my mouth shut. At the end of the meeting, his dad did admit that I seemed like a hardworking woman, but he had always dreamed of watching his son get married to someone wealthier than him. This really offended me since I had never ever asked Ron to foot my lifestyle, and it was not my fault where I came from because, at the end of the day, all the challenges I faced made me this independent person, and I was not going to be ashamed about it. After this meeting, I told Ron that I was done meeting his parents and that he would be going to meet his family all on his own the next time because I did not want to go through so much scrutiny. He did try to protest, but I stayed firm in my decision and told him how humiliating it was. I also pointed out to him that my parents never treated him this way, so his parents had no right to be so cold and unwelcoming towards me. In the end, he agreed, and since then, he has always gone to meet his family all on his own. However, despite what his family thought, our relationship continued to blossom, and soon we were talking about moving in together. I have to add that this was completely Ron's idea. You see, my lease renewal was coming up, and I was looking to find a bigger place to move into for me and my dog when Ron told me that it would be a better idea for us to move in with him. We had been dating for 10 months by this time, so I was a bit hesitant. However, he tried to reason with me and told me how he could see himself spending the rest of his life with me, and moving in was the next logical step in our relationship. I took a few days to think, but in the end, I agreed. His house, which had been bought by his father, was really grand, but it always felt a bit too cold to me. You know, like how you step into an interior design showroom where everything was carefully curated but lacked the warmth of a lived-in home. I turned his cold, lifeless house into a home. We had agreed on splitting bills, and I didn't mind since I liked paying for my own things, and I was anyway not having to pay any rent here. I think this is when I started noticing his life more closely now that we were living together. Up until then, I was always dazzled by his charms and the luxurious lifestyle he projected. One of the first things that struck me was the emptiness of his daily routine. Although he worked in finance, he seldom went to his office except for just one day of the week. He told me how his boss was his dad's friend, so he didn't have to go to the office every day, which I guess made sense. However, instead of working properly from 9 to 5, he would easily get tired and irritated and go out shopping. I would be at the office when he would send me multiple pictures of him wearing different luxury brand shoes, asking me which one I liked the best. This would happen at least 3 times a week, but it was his money, so I didn't say anything. Next, every time he would buy a shoe, he would click and post multiple pictures of what he bought and constantly check on his phone to see if his friends or followers replied to his story. Ron had become a bit of an influencer since he always posted luxury stuff, so I guess that's why he was always into his phone, chasing after validation and approval. His social media friends would sometimes invite him to parties, but he would never take me with him and give me excuses like how he is not allowed to bring A+1 and how he just wants to make new friends all on his own. Even then, I kept my mouth shut, even though it irked me a bit. Next, he bought a luxury sports car. I don't even know how someone can pay so much money for just a four-wheeler. While all of this was happening, I noticed that he had zero interest in paying any of his bills. Even though we had agreed on splitting our bills, he would always end up telling me to pay everything, and this would include his phone and cable bills, which I didn't even use. If I ever brought up that subject, he would tell me how we are partners and since he is letting me stay for free, I should help out more. Looking back, I don't think my issue was paying his bills, but it was the gut instinct I had that something about him just felt wrong. If he was wealthy enough to buy luxury shoes, clothes, and cars, then why does he need help in paying bills? Obviously, I was grateful that I could stay at his place rent-free, but I didn't mind paying rent and living on my own if that meant that I would only pay my bills. Unlike him, I had a fixed budget, and I wanted to save as much money as I could so I could one day start a family. I felt like he needed to do the same because if that was not our goal, then I didn't want to be with him. I decided to have a serious conversation where I told him all of this very frankly, and I gave him the option to break up with me if he and I were not on the same page. However, he assured me that he very much wanted to start a family with me and that I was a dependable woman. He told me that he was going to stop spending too much money. I thought everything would be fine after this. However, one day while cleaning his garage on a weekend when he was out golfing, I discovered that Ron had been living a facade in front of the whole world, including me. It turns out that most of what he flaunted was financed through debt and loans. His fancy car and his designer wardrobe were bought on credit. He had recent credit bills due to repay, which he had absconded. I was shaken when I went through the bills, which he had apparently hidden inside a shoebox. This meant that he had knowingly kept this hidden from me. I was furious. I waited for him to get back from golfing with his friends. When he did come back, he saw me sitting with all of his bills right in front of the table, and he freaked out. He started yelling at me about why I went through the bills, and I told him how I knew everything, and he could not hide from me anymore. Update. I announced my pregnancy to my husband's family and they gave me the dirtiest looks. I was confused and asked my husband about it. He was acting clueless until I got a call from my sister-in-law begging me not to baby trap her brother. I confronted my husband about this, and now they are all panicking. Ron tried to backtrack, telling me how these were just a few bills and that he was working on repaying them. I asked him why he had not just repaid them already since he was bringing in income every month from his job. This is when Ron confessed to me that he had been out of a job for the last 4 months. I was shocked by this revelation since he had been going into the office once a week as usual for the last 4 months, and the rest of the days, we would text while I was at the office, and he was supposedly working from home. I asked him how this happened and why he never told me about it. Ron opened up about how his boss was an a-hole and had gone back on his word, pushing for Ron to go to the office every day since the company was taking on more clients, and Ron needed to have more face-to-face meetings. However, Ron felt it was disrespectful, and after a disagreement with his boss, he was sacked. Ron went on to tell me how it was not a big deal and that he would get a job in a jiffy once he started applying. My eyes widened in shock as I asked him what the hell he had been doing for the past 4 months if he had yet to apply for a job. Ron replied that he was taking a break for his mental health and that I should not blame him for any of this. I told him that even if he had lost his job, it didn't make sense why he was not able to pay bills, considering he apparently came from a wealthy family. Ron told me how he did ask his parents for help, but they had refused. He went off about how his parents clearly favored his older sister more and how unfair this was. I felt like my entire relationship with him had been a lie. The illusion he had portrayed of himself was starting to crumble. Clearly, he was not wealthy, which explained why he depended on me to pay his bills while his unemployed self continued to buy luxury items and post about them on social media. I told him very firmly that I loved him, but this was not something I signed up for. I explained that I knew exactly how it felt to be broke, and I had worked really hard to come out of it. I was not going to let anyone drag me back to that place ever again. I informed him that if he didn't agree to change his ways right then and there and show me through actions, I would be out of his house with my things that very evening. I guess seeing me this angry really got through to Ron. He immediately apologized and sat down to discuss ways to deal with his bills. I told him that he needed to sell his car, pay back all his credit card bills, and stop buying luxury items for a while. Ron tried to refuse, telling me how people were going to judge him and how his friends would make fun of him. I told him that I honestly didn't care about any of that because he had mounting debts that needed to be resolved first. He then asked if I could help him pay off some of the loans, but I refused, letting him know that this was his responsibility. I agreed to continue paying our monthly bills and taking care of daily expenses, but I made it clear that until he took proactive measures to lessen his debt, I would not feel comfortable discussing a future with him. Begrudgingly, he agreed. Over the following months, Ron took proactive steps to address his debt. We put his car up for sale, and since it was a sports car, we got lucky because the sale yielded enough to pay back his loan and even keep a little extra to pay down other bills. He cut back on unnecessary expenses and focused on repaying his credit card bills. It was a challenging time for him since he wasn't used to cutting back on anything, and there were moments of frustration and doubt. But I encouraged him to work hard to regain control of his finances. Eventually, Ron managed to clear a significant portion of his debt, and I felt proud of him for trying. We discussed him getting a job, but Ron opened up about his plan to start his own business. He told me that he had an entrepreneurial spirit and wanted to explore that. I was vehemently against this, as I am far more risk-averse than Ron. I knew he could be very fickle-minded at times, and I wasn't sure if he had the determination to concentrate on building a business. However, he had worked hard to pay off his debt, so I didn't argue much. During this time, Ron proposed to me, which took me by surprise. He told me how he had listened to all my demands and had paid off his debt, so now we could concentrate on starting a family together. I told him yes because, at the end of the day, I did love him, and all I wanted was for him to keep working hard just like I did so we could both build a life together. He informed me that his parents were unaware he would be proposing, so he was a bit nervous to tell them. When he called to inform his parents, they told him that even though they were happy for him and would support him, they really did not expect that he would end up with someone like me. On the other hand, my parents were happy for me. We had a small wedding because I did not want to spend too much money and mess up our credit after Ron had just come out of debt. My parents graciously stepped in to help with the expenses for our wedding, and I took out money from my savings to contribute as well. Ron's contributions, on the other hand, were minimal, despite his family's supposed wealth. When our guests marveled at the elegance of the event, some even assumed that Ron and his family had probably footed the bill. Throughout all of this, Ron remained silent, never correcting their assumptions or acknowledging the truth. I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. It was disheartening to see him bask in the false praise, especially knowing that he had been unemployed for months and hadn't contributed financially as much as one would expect. His parents also shamelessly never corrected anyone, and maybe out of guilt, they decided to pay for our honeymoon. This was unexpected, but we accepted since otherwise, we may not have gone on a honeymoon at all. After our wedding and honeymoon, Ron worked on starting his own social media agency, just as he had decided. He planned to work with brands and hire influencers. This is undoubtedly a lucrative business, but there are hundreds of agencies like this, and it's difficult to stand out. I would constantly come home to him grumbling about how he couldn't secure an influencer for an event or that he had lost an influencer who was not up for negotiation. Also, brands seldom worked with new agencies, so it was really difficult for him to find brands that trusted him enough to sign up with him. As a result, the business never earned any income, and I would sometimes beg him to go back to finding a proper 9-to-5 job, even though it wasn't as exciting. Ron would get pissed and tell me how he needed time and that he was going to make it. However, no matter how many events he attended or the influencers he met, his business was not successful and was definitely not dependable. Meanwhile, I was getting frustrated with being the sole breadwinner and working every second of the day that I was awake. I would come home to more work, the dishes were never cleaned, the laundry was piling up, and the dog needed to be taken for a walk. On top of this, he would wait for me to cook for him while he would tell me about all the bills that needed to be paid. If I ever brought up anything about my work, he would tell me how glad he was to have left his job since he couldn't be as stressed about work as I was. This really irked me because I was the one paying for everything with my stressful job while he was off partying every day at various events. I slowly started to resent him more and more. We would do nothing except watch TV together, and it was starting to feel suffocating. On weekends, I would sleep a lot because I was constantly burnt out from working the entire week. If I ever told him to help me out with chores around the house, he would tell me how starting a business needed his 100% energy and that as his partner, I should be more understanding. Last month, on top of all this stress, I found out I was pregnant. Now, I have always imagined being pregnant and having a baby, but I don't know why, but I felt like this is not how I would like to start a family. I mean, when you're bringing a child into this world, you want them to have a stable home and 2 providing parents. However, in our case, I was the only one providing, and he was doing nothing to contribute to the household. Final update. I announced my pregnancy to my husband's family and they gave me the dirtiest looks. I was confused and asked my husband about it. He was acting clueless until I got a call from my sister-in-law begging me not to baby trap her brother. I confronted my husband about this, and now they are all panicking. If I did bring in a child, then I would just have to do even more work on top of everything I was doing currently. I decided to talk to him about my thoughts. Unlike me, Ben was ecstatic and hugged me in happiness. He told me how wonderful this news was and that he could not wait to become a father. When I brought up how exhausted I felt around the house and how having a baby would only increase my work, he told me that he agreed and that he would start taking up responsibilities around the house. I was surprised by his enthusiasm and glad that he was going to step up. In the past weeks, Ron has stepped up. I still do 80% of the work around the house, like cooking, cleaning, and laundry, but he cleans the dishes, takes out the trash, and takes the dog out for a walk. I thought we could get better and better over time. This past weekend, he told me that he would be going to meet his family, so I informed him that I would tag along since we wanted to make the pregnancy announcement together. I know I did not exactly picture his parents being thrilled with our pregnancy, but when I announced it, their faces literally fell. His mother and sister scoffed at me and gave me the dirtiest looks, while his dad looked down as if I had made a grave mistake. His mother looked me straight in the eye and told me how this was just ridiculous and that there was no need to bring a child into our marriage with the problems that we were facing. I asked her what she meant, but she ignored me and excused herself from the table. Ron and I decided to leave because clearly the mood was spoiled, and I had no idea why. On our way back, I asked him what his mother was talking about, but he shook his head, saying he had no idea, and went on to say how it would be a good idea for him to continue meeting his family alone from now on since they were clearly upsetting me. I felt really angry and disappointed with him because I had done absolutely nothing wrong to make his family treat me this way, and with the baby coming, I had thought that for once we could all let go of the past for the sake of the child. Yesterday, while I was at work, I received a call from my sister-in-law. She had never called me before unless it was something really important, so I immediately picked up, thinking maybe something happened to my husband or their parents. In our conversation, my sister-in-law told me how she had talked with Ben, who felt they were all really disrespectful towards me, but she wanted to tell me finally exactly why they all felt this way. This is when she went on to tell me that she knew how we were struggling because of all the debts I had, and they didn't appreciate all the work Ben was putting in for me when I was doing nothing to contribute financially. I took a beat to digest the information and then asked her to tell me exactly what she meant because I was confused by what she was implying. Sister-in-law then goes on to say that Ben had told them that I had massive debts and he was the one who had to pay for everything by selling off his car and even sacrificing by not buying luxury brands. My head was spinning as she then went on to tell me how she could not let her brother suffer more and that I should not baby trap him. I can't even begin to express how pissed off I felt at that moment. This man-child had gone and lied to his family about me being in debt just to save his own face. He clearly didn't want people to think he was broke, so he had made up this messed up story where he could blame me. Here I was, working hard day and night at a job that I disliked just so that I could pay our bills while he continued to make up stories. I was so angry that I didn't even want to explain anything to his sister, so I simply told her that she was right and that I should not baby trap him since he was not worthy enough to be a father anyway. I then cut the call and informed my boss that I was not feeling well so I could go back home. I knew my husband was out meeting an influencer, so I quickly gathered my things so I could move out with my dog. I didn't even bother leaving a note and just drove away with everything I owned in my car. Since yesterday, I have been living at my parents' place while Ron has been frantically calling me. He must have talked with his sister because he has sent me messages saying how he could explain everything and how he just needed me to come back home. My parents have no idea yet what is going on, but they know this is a serious issue, so they haven't asked me a lot of questions. I am honestly at a fix. On one hand, I'm pregnant and I want my child to have a father, but on the other hand, I don't want to be with someone who has been lying about me when I have provided him with so much. Update 1. I talked with my parents about everything, and they agree, like everyone else on Reddit, that I need to leave my husband. What he has done is truly unforgivable. He went to such lengths to lie about me over the years, even though I had been nothing but a good, loyal partner to him. The audacity he had to lie and say it was my debt goes on to show that I can't trust him. I am planning on talking to him and letting him know my decision to divorce him. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update. I talked with my husband 2 days ago. He had been calling and texting me for days. He got in touch with my parents, who informed him that I was staying with them, however, they did not clarify anything else. He came over to my parents' place yesterday so we could talk. He was clearly shaken up and straight up started to apologize. I asked him if he even knew what he was apologizing for, and he nodded, telling me how after I had left, he had called everyone and his sister had informed him that she had a conversation with me, so then he had pieced it together. I asked him why he would make such atrocious lies about me and how insulted I felt when his sister called to tell me that I was baby trapping him. He nodded remorsefully and went on to tell me how he has always felt insecure around his family members. He told me that all his parents cared about was their wealth and status, so he was too embarrassed to tell anyone the truth. He went on to tell me how, when his family inquired about where his car was, it was just easier for him to blame me and tell them a story about how I was in debt and he was helping me out rather than owning up to his mistakes. He told me that he never thought it would be a big deal since I wasn't close to his family anyway. I shook my head in disappointment and let him know that I had no idea that he could be this disgusting and manipulative. I reminded him how much I had worked all these years to provide for us, yet here he was admitting shamelessly how easily he had betrayed me. I informed him that I was divorcing him. Hearing this, he started to plead with me to not do this, telling me how we should think about the baby. But I informed him that we didn't have to be married to be co-parents to our child. I pointed out to him that the child would be much happier growing up in a stable environment, free from this tension and discord in our relationship. Despite his pleas, I remained resolute in my decision to end the marriage. Clearly, we had reached a point where staying together was no longer healthy for either of us. The thought of subjecting my child to a tumultuous household filled with arguments and resentment is not something I am willing to entertain. He pleaded a bit more, but in the end, he had to leave when he saw that I wasn't going to change my mind. He did try to apologize to my parents before leaving, but they looked at him with disappointment and did not respond to his apology. Update 3. A lot of you have suggested I reach out to his family and clarify everything. I don't want to see them, however, I do think it is right for me to tell them the truth once and for all. Hence, I sat down and wrote a long email to his parents and sister yesterday, detailing every expenditure I have ever paid for Ron, along with screenshots of payments from my bank account. I wrote about how he was the one with debt and had bills piling up while he kept buying one luxury item after another. I let them know that I wanted nothing from them and Ben was free to walk away from my child if that is what he wished. However, he would be liable to pay child support every month. I let them know my decision to divorce Ben and told them how they could finally have their wish and marry him off to a much wealthier woman. Since my email, Ben has texted me furiously since he is now being bombarded by his parents and sister, who are furious at him for lying about me. They have even called me, but I haven't bothered picking up their calls. His sister has sent me a text apologizing for what she said and is pleading with me to not leave the family. Honestly, I do not care about their apologies or their opinions at this point. I have already made my decision to move forward with a divorce, so I will be meeting a divorce lawyer next week.